Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and look at how our modern consciousness was actually meticulously mapped out well over a century ago. You might think the way we process information today is entirely unprecedented, right? But as we're about to see, the blueprints for our modern chaotic minds were actually drawn up way, way before the first computer was ever even built.
Think about your own mind for just a single minute right now. It's totally dizzying, isn't it? I mean, how many times does it jump from a tragic news headline to a funny meme to a targeted ad and then to some random memory from 5 years ago? We live in this era of constant cognitive chaos and totally fragmented attention spans. But here's the really interesting part. This exact mental state, it is not a modern invention at all. That feeling of being pulled in a dozen different directions at once, of having your internal timeline fractured by an endless stream of inputs, yeah, that was diagnosed long before the digital age.
A century ago, two brilliant avant-garde writers looked at a rapidly changing world and realized that, well, traditional ways of writing were completely failing to capture the true human experience. So what did they do? They fundamentally broke the rules of storytelling. Meet Marcel Proust and James Joyce. These guys essentially became the structural engineers of language, literally tearing down old narrative frameworks to perfectly map out the exact, fragmented, chaotic reality that we experience on our smartphones today.
So, let's start with Section 1, the fragmentation of reality. To understand exactly how they pulled this off, we've got to rewind to the 1910s and see why the old, linear ways of looking at the world completely died out. It was essentially the collapse of the Belle Epoque. Just think about what was happening all at once. You had Sigmund Freud unlocking the invisible unconscious mind. Then you had the deep, world-shattering trauma of the First World War in 1914, which just completely obliterated Europe's institutional stability and bourgeois optimism. Then you inject Einstein's theory of relativity into the mix, literally rewriting our baseline understanding of space and time. Add to that the mass integration of cinema, fast cars, telephone networks. It was this high-velocity, technological, and traumatic implosion. All of this meant that 19th century linear narratives, those predictable, straightforward A to B stories, became entirely obsolete. They just couldn't handle the simultaneous data streams of modern daily life.
This whole situation required a massive philosophical shift, which was heavily influenced by the philosopher Henri Bergson. We essentially moved away from chronological clock time, the predictable linear ticking of a watch and the market metrics of the 19th century, to what's called psychological duration. Writers basically stopped acting as social reporters, just looking out the window, and instead they violently pivoted their focus entirely inward. They started exploring the highly fragmented and fluid labyrinths of the human psyche.
Which brings us right to Section 2, Proust and involuntary memory.
So our first structural engineer, Marcel Proust, actually managed this massive architectural undertaking from a cork-lined room in Paris, where he was mostly confined due to severe asthma. And from that room, he explored a deeply relatable question. I'm sure you've experienced this. It hits you totally out of nowhere. A whiff of a certain perfume or the sound of a rainstorm, and suddenly, bam, you aren't in your living room anymore. You are vividly reliving a moment from decades ago. If you felt this, you've experienced the exact psychological phenomenon that Proust built his entire legacy on. He called this involuntary memory. Proust realized that you really can't force yourself to perfectly recreate the past just by trying hard to remember it using your analytical intellect. It just doesn't work that way. Instead, these legacy data streams and vivid memories reemerge in a pure sensory form, and they're almost always triggered by something incredibly casual and simple in your environment, some low-tier external stimulus. And here is the absolute most famous execution of this idea. Step 1, the adult narrator, Marcel, casually dips a piece of a Madeleine pastry into his tea. Step 2, that specific, localized flavor metric acts as a powerful data trigger. And then, Step 3, it instantaneously unleashes a massive 7-volume archive of stored memories tracking his youth in the rural town of Cambrai, along with his anxieties and the structural decay of the French aristocracy. That one simple act is the engine of his monumental masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time, which was published between 1913 and 1927. Now, this wasn't just a neat literary trick. It was actually Proust's operational methodology to fight back against aging, mortality, and the relentless ticking clock. By capturing these sensory triggers, he was transmuting the fluid, volatile raw material of internal memory into something solid. He literally turned fleeting thoughts into the eternal architecture of a literary masterpiece. All right, let's jump over to our other visionary in section 3, Joyce and the Daily Epic. While Proust was busy building these cathedrals of memory, James Joyce, who was a voluntary expatriate transiting through Trieste, Zurich, and Paris, launched a radically different piece of machinery in 1922. He built the stream of consciousness engine. He totally dismantled traditional sentence structure and syntax to accurately capture the chaotic, disorganized, and nonstop flow of our internal thoughts. He wanted to mimetize raw, immediate sensory perceptions and hidden appetites operating within ordinary people, completely bypassing classical, neat storytelling. Just look at the incredible contrast he designed in his masterpiece, Ulysses. I mean, where Homer's Odyssey features these high, heroic warriors of ancient Greece, Joyce gives us Leopold Bloom, who is just a quiet, ordinary Jewish advertising solicitor. Instead of epic battlefields and mythological oceans, Bloom is navigating the mundane bars, brothels, and municipal streets of Dublin. And most strikingly, instead of a decade-long epic journey, Ulysses takes place entirely on a rigid, single-day audit, June 16, 1904. Designed overtly as a parody, Joyce basically converted standard prosaic life into the true definitive epic odyssey of modern human capital. The masterwork eventually liquidates its narrative loops with Molly Bloom's iconic final chapter. It is this torrential soliloquy grid, a nonstop flow of intimate thoughts entirely devoid of punctuation metrics. It's the ultimate stream of consciousness, capturing all her frustrations and memories, and ending in that famous ultimate validation of life. And yes, I said yes, I will yes. Now we reach section 4, the bankruptcy of clock time. The structural contrast between these two authors is absolutely staggering. Think about it. In Joyce's Ulysses, a single 24-hour cycle demands hundreds of highly analytical pages just to document the friction of a mental stream. But conversely, in Proust's work, entire decades of legacy existence can just evaporate across a few compressed, rapid paragraphs. For both of these engineers, the primary metric is never the quantity of physical calendar years that pass. It's all about the extreme depth with which a single second of internal perception impacts the human apparatus. Together, they formally decreed the complete bankruptcy of linear chronological time in high-value literature. Let's move to our final section, Section 5, our modern digital modernism.
So how does this all connect to us today? Well, the audacious techniques used by these authors essentially built a flawless structural forecasting of our current cognitive processing. In our 21st century landscape, as you scroll through a smartphone interface, you're bombarded by international warfare data, targeted advertising placements, comic memes, and microfictional gossip all at the exact same time. You're quite literally experiencing Joycean fragmentation on a daily, hyper-accelerated scale. Joyce's stream of consciousness is exactly how your social media feed operates right now.
And it actually gets even more precise than that. When your phone serves up a push notification with a random photo from a vacation 5 years ago, it is executing the exact involuntary memory retrieval protocol that Proust engineered a century ago. Those algorithmically dispatched memories from social media platforms, they are our modern digital Proustian Madelines, triggering our past with a simple tap. As this perfect summary puts it, modern users operate in a permanent state of cognitive dispersal and temporal fragmentation. We are literally living in the exact chaotic landscape that these authors mapped out. It absolutely proves that the psychological engineering developed by Proust and Joyce remains the single most accurate map we have to decode the chaos of our hyper-connected digital consciousness. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. If the architecture of your daily thought process was predicted by avant-garde novelists from the 1920s, it begs a rather profound question. In an algorithmic world explicitly designed to constantly fracture your attention stream, how are you managing your own temporal equity today? It really leaves us to wonder, are you the focused author of your own consciousness, constructing your own eternal architecture, or are you just endlessly scrolling through someone else's modern urban odyssey?